Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Alain Badiou's book, St. Paul, the Foundation of Universalism. Badiou is an incredibly important contemporary philosopher. He's also an incredibly difficult contemporary philosopher. I've tried to read some of his other books, and man, are they sometimes tough. Part of the problem that I have is that Badiou likes to incorporate mathematics into his philosophy as a sort of baseline for logic, and I don't know shit about mathematics. So I actually quite like St. Paul because this book does not rely on mathematics. It is still philosophically challenging. It's theologically challenging, but because it's based in theology, textual analysis, and philosophy, it's speaking a language I can understand, whereas mathematics is a language that I cannot. So, what's the book fundamentally about? Well, it is a theological treatise, in a way. Badiou is offering his particular reading of the texts of St. Paul. St. Paul, for those of you who don't know, is the apostle to the nations. So in early Christianity, you have the immediate sort of followers of Jesus, the Jesus movement, we might call it. And then you have Paul, who's originally Saul of Tarsus. He is a Jew. He's a Roman citizen, and he's also a Jew, so he's in this sort of hybrid position. But he is initially a persecutor of the Christians, and then supposedly on the road to Damascus, he has a vision from God. The resurrected Jesus is revealed to him and says, hey, straighten up and fly right. And Paul is like, I'm fucking a Christian now. I'm going to go spread the word to everybody. Jews, Gentiles, men, women, I don't care. Everybody's getting the good news about the resurrection. So that's Paul's whole deal in a nutshell. The other apostles, the people who actually knew Jesus, theoretically the people who write the Gospels, although realistically the Gospels were not written by the people they're attributed to, separate question. They actually knew Jesus. They are much more concerned with questions like, what did Jesus say? What did he do? What were his miracles? What did his ministry look like? Etc., etc. Paul does not give a shit about any of that. The only thing that matters for Paul, and this is Badiou's reading, the only thing that matters for Paul is that Jesus was resurrected. That is literally it. Paul doesn't give a fuck about anything else. Everything else is details, and Paul is not concerned with details. What he is concerned with is this event occurred. And I use the word event purposefully because that's one of Badiou's big terms, one of his big ideas. We'll talk more about that. So that's the thing for Paul. The resurrection occurred. And why that's important, why this is important for Badiou is because this is the invention of the universal. The invention of a worldview that is contrary to both the Jewish prophetic tradition, that is the tradition in which prophets reveal to the chosen people particular wisdom, and it is through that wisdom, through that revelation of wisdom, that the subject is constituted. But also, Paul's new approach is contrasted to the Greek worldview, in which wisdom can be rationally gained, and the subject is constituted through the act of rationally engaging with the world around them. The Socratic tradition, but also the pre-Socratic tradition, but it's neither here nor there. What Badiou claims is that Paul invents a third mode of discourse, and actually a fourth mode of discourse in a way, but that's sort of less central to Badiou's real argument here. So rather than the Jewish prophetic tradition out of which Paul comes, because he is a Jew, and rather than the Greek rationalist tradition that Paul would have been very familiar with as a Roman citizen, Paul invents faith. Faith in the event, specifically. And so, essentially, what Badiou means by the event, and this is a big term for him, his book, Being and, I think it's called Being and the Event, theorizes this more fully, along with some of his other books. But basically, the event is something that occurs in the world that completely disrupts the existing schema for the world. The world runs a certain way. There are certain things that are understood to be true, and then something occurs. For St. Paul, the resurrection of Jesus. That thing breaks the existing schemas. So one way that Badiou explains it, he says, it is pure event. This is the resurrection. Is pure event, opening of an epoch, transformation of the relations between the possible and the impossible. So basically the idea, so specifically with the resurrection for St. Paul, the idea is that death no longer means what it had meant. Because Christ can conquer death, the possibility has been created that everyone else can conquer death. The previous relations of the world, which were governed by the logic of life and death, no longer apply. And for St. Paul, this is one of the big things, this possibility is open to everyone. This is where it becomes universal. Because anyone, so the idea with the event basically is that the mode that Badiou ascribes to St. Paul is the apostolic mode rather than the prophetic or the rationalist mode. One becomes an apostle, and what he means by that is the apostle's discourse is one of pure fidelity to the possibility opened by the event. So, according to Badiou's reading of Paul, the details of being a Christian are irrelevant. Sorry, Catholic Church, things like baptism, communion, marriage, confession. No, Paul doesn't give a shit about those. Those are, you can do them because they're localized customs, whatever it is, but there's nothing inherently important about them. The only thing for Paul in Badiou's reading that matters is faith in the possibility of the resurrection, faith in that event, that death can be overcome, that the existing schema, which is governed by death, can be destroyed. In other places, Badiou talks about 4 different categories of events. There are scientific events, the development of the theory of evolution, for instance, or the theory of relativity, maybe. I don't know science that well, but things that sort of change the way we understand the world and that open up possibilities for radical equality. There are political events. The French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the American Revolution. But I would also maybe put Greek tragedy into this category. Greek tragedy is sort of between the political and artistic categories for me, because it is artistic. It is an artistic revolution, but I also argue that Greek tragedy has a pro-democratic ethos built into it. So in that sense, but we get these movements, these moments of expanding who can, of sort of universalizing the possibilities of freedom, equality, justice, etc., etc. So those are the first two, scientific and political. Well, those are two. Artistic is another one. Someone like Picasso, someone like Van Gogh, someone like Goya create these new forms of art. Samuel Beckett in the theater. T.S. Eliot, Virginia Woolf, the high modernists, just break conventional forms in ways that open up possibilities, radical possibilities, radical egalitarian possibilities in many ways. And so what the apostle, and the fourth one is individual love, which for Badiou is kind of broader than individual love, but that sort of experience of losing oneself in another person, etc., etc. So, for Badiou, the idea of the apostle is that the apostle maintains faith to the possibilities of that event, regardless of historical circumstances. So, let's say, for instance, that you were radically dedicated to the egalitarianism of the French Revolution. You believed deep in the core of your being, and you made it central to your life's mission to enact liberté, égalité, fraternité. You are maintaining faith in that event. The fact that the actual French Revolution descended into the Terror and then Napoleonic France is irrelevant to it. Those are historical details. The event itself, the establishment of the Republic, the destruction of the monarchy, the beheading of the king, these are details, but that freedom, that justice, that equality, that was the driving ideal behind the French Revolution. The same thing, the Russian Revolution is another, again, incredibly problematic one. The Chinese Communist Revolution, same thing. The actual historical results of these are very, very often horrific, and yet the ethos was liberatory. The ethos of communism, of socialism, is a radical equality, that we can abolish class hierarchies, class privilege, etc., etc. And this, interestingly enough, would be why something like Nazism, fascism, could not function as an event in Badiou's schema, because it is inherently un-egalitarian. Nazism, for instance, is premised, irreducibly premised, on the idea that some human beings are better than others. That some people, Jews, like myself, Slavs, LGBT people, people of African descent, etc., etc., that these people are fundamentally excluded from the vision of Nazism. This means that this is not a universalist doctrine, whereas in theory, communism, for instance, is. In theory, classical liberalism is the philosophy that drove the American and French and Haitian revolutions. Theoretically, this is a radically liberatory, egalitarian philosophy, even though, of course, in reality, in historical circumstances, these things rarely functioned that way. But the thing that Badiou argues that I think is really interesting is basically that you can have a kind of cosmopolitanism that grows out of faith in the event, because you maintain fidelity to the possibility opened up by the resurrection or the French Revolution or Beckett's re-envisioning of theater or whatever it is. Because you maintain fidelity to that possibility, you can maintain localized customs without being bogged down by those. So what Badiou says here is, it consists in supposing that whatever people's opinions and customs, once gripped by the truth's post-evental work, their thought becomes capable of traversing and transcending those opinions and customs without having to give up the differences that allow them to recognize themselves in the world. So we think about Christianity, Pauline Christianity, particularly because St. Paul is, at least arguably, the key figure that defines Christianity despite the emergence of Christian ritual as a central thing, etc., etc. But this idea that that Christianity can go anywhere, that anyone can be a Christian by maintaining faith in the resurrection of Jesus. I mean, we see that because Christianity is practiced all over the world. Islam is practiced all over the world. People in radically different contexts with radically different local customs practice Christianity or Islam. This idea that the possibility, the eventual possibility, the liberatory possibility is open to anyone. I don't know. I'd have to think more about Islam, maybe, because Islam may in fact be more in the Jewish prophetic tradition. But this idea that anybody in the world can be a Christian and they don't have to give up their particular culture, their particular values, whatever it is an incredibly powerful one. This is where Paul's famous statement, which Badiou makes much of, that there's no such thing as a Jew and no such thing as a Greek, no such thing as a man, no such thing as a woman. This is where this idea comes in. This idea that regardless of the sort of accidental or incidental characteristics of an individual's identity, faith in the resurrection and the possibilities of the resurrection as an event is all that matters.